Yo, 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 once again, this is CryptoCrayze, and I'm doing a final video on Sparkster. This is actually quite interesting one. I'm reviewing the ICO process itself. Any of you who follow my Minds and other kind of accounts, my Steam account, etc., you'll know that I've actually written up a review already. But I thought it'd be nice for those of you who are particularly just following the YouTube account to get a little review on here as well. So first and foremost, just to provide you with a general overview as how we're going to tackle this. Um, Essentially, we're just going to look at some general considerations first, followed by looking at who Sparkster actually is, briefly touch on that. We've got quite a few other videos on that already. Then we'll look at some current approaches that are out there in the market at the moment with regards to the ICO process. Thereafter, we'll look at Sparkster's approach. Finally, I'll offer my critique. And hopefully this will be quite sufficient and comprehensive for the general process. But yeah, let's take it from there.
CryptoCrayze.
So first, which is just with regard to some general considerations. Generally you want to really consider whenever it comes to an ICO process, there are several things that a company wants to really bear in mind. Two key criteria are just fairness and transparency, first and foremost. Every company wants to show that they're being very transparent, that they're being fair. They're not just in it for the money, but they actually care to ensure that they get a diverse range of investors, and everyone has an equal chance of investing. That's generally the case. Generally also people tend to show their transparency and stuff, and show they're trying to be even fair in their terms, in terms of how they handle their own tokens by locking up tokens for like a period of 18 to 24 months on average, etc. But at the same time, they want to really ensure that sufficient levels of hype and interest are made in the short term, so that when the project launches initially and when it hits an exchange, it's deemed a success straight away. That it looks like it's a success because it hits at a high rate. It's your people are already making back X times the initial investment. But, simultaneously at the same time, people want to ensure that their product actually performs well in the long term. So there's that long-term marketability aspect that actually matters quite a lot as well. And this is ultimately done by creating like large community on social media, on Telegram, Twitter, Facebook, and essentially just keeping the community engaged. After you've actually done the ICO launch, what you really want is a set of people who continue to follow, your announcements in terms of like partnerships and all that kind of stuff, because that will ultimately be the people that are buying in, that will drive, more buy-ins and stuff when it comes to big announcements. That kind of stuff will drive up the price when you've actually got a lot of people following. And if they fail here, the team also who have their tokens locked up and who are being released progressively over time, they're also going to essentially be pained because they're going to be given worthless or severely undervalued payouts, and that's the kind of thing they don't want. So they kind of need to manage that as well. That's something that's quite interesting, or quite key rather.
CryptoCrayze.
So who is Sparkster? Sparkster, again, like just to provide a very brief overview, they've sought to revamp this whole ICO process. But before we can get into that, I guess just an overview would be useful. They're a blockchain technology company that seeks to make blockchain technology accessible to the masses through like a plug-and-play style interface. And essentially their platform presupposes, zero coding ability and requires zero future coding ability. There's no real requirement in terms of coding from the individual, whilst they still allow the individual to make the full use of the benefits afforded by blockchain. The blockchain technology is under the bonnet, so to speak. Whilst people can just engage with essentially coding in what they call plain English, which is quite beautiful. Sparkster is also quite an important ICO because it's actually overcome some of blockchain's biggest technological issues, at least within its use with regards to the use case that it's focused on. So Sparkster have stopped maintaining what they call the global state, and essentially that means they can stop. Their cells don't really need to have awareness of one another. They don't really need to speak to one another, and so that allows them to shard their hash tables. And in sharding their hash tables, they can actually benefit from the aggregate transactions per second afforded to them by the individual cells, and this scales linearly with cells. So this is quite a wonderful architectural design. It deals with the issue of transactions per second, which is something that really has limited the growth of blockchain technology, and is really the biggest issue that we need to solve at the moment in order for global adoption to actually take place. So yeah, it's absolutely smashed the even transactions per second associated with centralized systems such as Visa, who hit about 25,000. So it's really already at a point whereby it's generally quite scalable, ready for global adoption. But the other thing, like I said, is coding in plain English means that you no longer have to rely on a few, set of elitists or a few set of specialized coders to actually build things for you. Everyone can get involved in coding on Sparkster. So next,
CryptoCrayze.
let's just consider some current approaches that are already out there in the general sphere. Right now, we have, first and foremost, we have a pure lottery approach. This is an approach where essentially everyone throws in their hat and they've got a certain probability of getting selected, a certain probability of not getting selected. That's literally it. And those who get selected essentially have an allocated amount they can buy. That's a pure lottery approach. You then have, like a randomly generated queue approach. And though it's different from the previous approach, it fundamentally creates the same issue as the above, in the sense that what ends up happening is you end up potentially favoring people in specific time zones. And with the previous approach, you end up essentially not really taking into account that certain people have been following you from the beginning, and though it maintains short-term hype, it really lacks quite a bit of fairness and long-term marketability. There are people who have been following you from the very beginning, and essentially when all is said and done, even though they help market and all these kind of things, their chance is just as good as somebody who comes in the day before. That's not really great. Thereafter, have the gas war, the first come first serve approach. Again, this kind of fails to reward the early contributors and ends up being more of an expensive lottery. Who ends up blindly paying the most to hopefully get in first. That's kind of what happens. And the bigger issue is that many people actually pay material amounts only for their Ethereum to be returned in the end, when they find out that they don't actually get selected. QuarkChain also has quite an elaborate approach. This was essentially one of the better approaches. There's a whole point system awarded for marketing and community contribution levels, for product knowledge, and then for how early you joined the Telegram group. However, the biggest issue was really what happened after 3 times the number of the optimal people. So you had 15,000 people past the threshold when really they only needed 5,000. This meant that they ended up just doing a lottery again. And so somebody who is even out of the 15,000, if you scored in the top 6, you still had 50% chance of missing out. And yet somebody who had just come in, who had just done a decent quiz and something, could have easily potentially got in without having done much at all for the community. It's not really that fair in the end. And the final one is just marketing in exchange for some allocation. Several companies have engaged in doing this. It's often limited to YouTube and blog content, but this generally discriminates against people who have small followings on the social network, on social media, etc. So, in terms of what's novel about Sparkster's approach, let's go on to that.
CryptoCrayze.
Sparkster's approach is quite novel because essentially they split it into two. They split it into what they call a proof of love and into a lottery. 75% is actually allocated to the proof of love, 25% of the tokens are allocated to a lottery. And it's unique because they've essentially blended together the concept of a bounty campaign with the individual guaranteed allocated investment amounts. And this means that a person who invests time in marketing Sparkster, hence proving their love, they simultaneously get awarded tokens and given the right to invest a given amount, essentially. Though some have also attempted to do something like this in the past to a degree, Sparkster's also been extremely generous, having distribute $300,000 to the bounty campaign alone. If you were to take the tokens at pre-sale value, that's absolutely massive. You do have the bounty and guaranteed allocations only available to the top 5,000 contributors, and therefore anyone else who misses out on that, who doesn't get sufficient points, or who misses it, still has a glimmer of hope through the lottery, but recognize that the lottery amount is quite low in the sense that it's 25%, and it's probably distributed for quite a lot of people. If I'm correct, I think it's something like 0.4 Ethereum each, which isn't actually that much. So yeah.
CryptoCrayze.
So I guess my thoughts are going to have to be in the topic of fairness, the lottery, long-term marketability, and the community. I guess really, I'm a fan of the proof of love approach, and hopefully it achieves a good level of fairness with the most knowledgeable and helpful participants actually excelling to the top. And I still think there's a bit of a harshness associated with a lottery. That said, I do appreciate and anticipate that there'll be quite a stronger correlation between higher contributions and early support, and that is a good thing. So hopefully that bypasses some of the unfairness that would have arisen with the other approaches. The allocation to the lottery also isn't 100%, so it's not a pure lottery. So it's not completely contingent on chance, so that's a good thing. And between the task, the explanation of the expected rewards, the leaderboard, and the ability to actually view your actual rewards, and and the ability to even view what the admins have actually given in terms of points to each reward, I think it's extremely transparent, and a level of transparency that has essentially been unparalleled in any other ICO approach so far. And with the whole community, over 60,000 people, 63,200 as at this moment, the reputation is going through the roof, and irrespective of like FUD and future mishaps, etc., Sparkster's future is bright. They've essentially had most people test from pre-crowd sale 6 well-implemented walkthroughs, and that's more than most people would have tested post-crowd sale on many other platforms. So Sparks has definitely got a bright future in that regard. And I think they've done well to balance, short-term hype and having such a large Telegram group and everyone fighting to get in the top 5,000, and also fighting for the lottery, long-term marketability in the sense that a lot of people have actually known about it and tested it and all that kind of stuff. Transparency in the way that they've conducted themselves, as previously mentioned. Community engagement in the sense that everyone's trying to help get involved and prove their love in order to get a good allocation, as well as bounty tokens. And fairness in the sense that those who actually do more for the community ultimately get better results, and it's not just limited to social media content.
CryptoCrayze.
So yeah, I guess in conclusion, as per usual, this isn't financial advice, and you should consult a financial advisor before investing. But in my personal opinion, Sparkster's process has been, it's been in a league of its own. It's the creme de la creme. It's a process, par excellence. It's really separate, and I think the fact that it transcends every other process that I've seen so far means, one, it will garner a lot of hype in both the short and the long term, which is befitting for such a well-designed platform. So it's definitely one to buy into, to hold on to, and to expect good things from, in my mind anyway. So yeah.
CryptoCrayze.
So if you're wondering what to do next, as per usual, if you like the video, like it. If you think that, if you want to see more, subscribe. Genuinely, I'm very happy to continue producing these things, provided you guys continue to enjoy them. So yeah, that said, this is CryptoCrayze, and I hope to see you soon. Cool.